Hi everyone, in this lesson we're going to be looking at homeostasis again, but this time we're going to be focusing on glucose or sugar levels in the body. This, because it's following on from homeostasis, please make sure that you are comfortable with the words stimulus, receptor, modulator, effector, response and feedback, as we will be using them in this lesson. There are quite a number of key words that we're going to be looking at. It is important that you understand these words and that you are able to use them in the context of a question. So I would advise that you perhaps start a glossary or make flashcards for this topic. All right, so we're going to start by looking at how glucose enters the body. We get energy by feeding or eating. So eventually that food that we eat is digested down and we end up with glucose entering our cells. As a result of that, we go through a series of chemical processes called aerobic respiration, and the outcome is energy for our body. Here is just a recap of that simple word equation. So remembering we get glucose from food that we have eaten, so we digest it, it travels in our bloodstream, diffuses into our cells along with oxygen. Aerobic respiration takes place, which breaks down that glucose, that glucose to release energy, and we have two waste products, carbon dioxide and water. So why are we talking about this? Well, we are relating this back to homeostasis. So this little feedback loop here is just to remind you that we want to try and stay completely balanced. Now, in reality, that doesn't happen. We end up with an imbalance constantly. We either need to eat because we're hungry, or we have just eaten, therefore our blood sugar levels rise. Now, in this scenario, I've just given you an example that your blood glucose concentration has decreased, so you eat something like a pizza. All the different food groups are digested. The main part of that, the carbohydrate, is digested down to glucose, which travels into the bloodstream. And because you now have a high concentration of glucose in the bloodstream, the blood glucose concentration rises and your homeostatic mechanism is no longer on that nice flat line. There is an imbalance and you have too much. So we're going to be looking at how hormones help to regulate homeostasis. Now this cartoon here goes through the steps of how that happens. First of all, the hormone insulin is what controls how much glucose is stored in cells. Now, insulin is produced in an organ called the pancreas, and specifically it's produced in beta cells of the pancreas. So you need to remember that. Insulin is a hormone. It's produced by beta cells in the pancreas. Now, what insulin does is it acts like a key. Now you can see in this diagram here, this key shape. So this is our cell surface. And insulin binds with a receptor, because remember, hormones bind with receptors. And what that does is it unlocks the cell, if you like. And these glucose molecules can then easily move in. And that's what we're trying to show in this picture here. So when you have lots of glucose in the body, you can carry out aerobic respiration and make energy. This cartoon here is just summarizing what's happened. So if we have too much glucose in the blood, that's usually because we've just eaten or drank something with a high carbohydrate level. The beta cells in the pancreas will detect that and release the hormone insulin. Insulin, as we know, travels in the bloodstream because it's a hormone. And you can see these little purple dots here are representing insulin. That will travel to its target cells. Remember, hormones have target cells, and you can see them up here. So that insulin will open up these target cells by binding to a receptor on the surface, And when they open up, they allow glucose to enter. When glucose enters a cell, it's no longer in the bloodstream, so therefore we reduce the blood glucose concentration. And you can see here that the start and the end result are different. They are opposites of each other, hence why this is referred to as negative feedback. All right, this next cartoon is just showing the effect that insulin can have. We have now lowered the blood glucose concentration. On the other side, we want to be looking at how glucose is stored in cells. So once we have got that glucose out of the bloodstream, like you can see in this picture at the bottom here, we want to know how we manage to get it to stay in there. So glucose is actually a really small molecule. That means that it can easily enter and therefore easily leave a cell. In order to make sure that it doesn't leave and we've got energy stores in our body, glucose will combine with other glucose molecules to make this giant structure called glycogen. Now, glycogen is large, which means that it cannot just simply diffuse back out of the cell. And this is how humans store excess energy in their body. The main place where we store excess glucose as glycogen are the liver, which you can see in this picture, and our skeletal muscle cells. Okay, so let's look at the opposite situation. Let's say that you've been asleep for 8 to 10 hours, therefore you haven't been eating, and your blood glucose concentration decreases. When it decreases, your body detects that there's a dip, you're no longer on that nice straight platform, so you want to break down glycogen and convert it back to glucose so that it can leave the liver and skeletal muscle cells easily. So glucagon is another hormone produced by the pancreas, and it has the opposite effect of insulin. So instead of encouraging the uptake of glucose to glycogen, glucagon will break down glycogen and convert it back to glucose. So glucagon is produced by the pancreas in special cells called the alpha cells. Alpha cells are also located in the pancreas, different from beta cells, which make insulin. Okay, so just a quick summary of what we've learned so far. We know that glucose is a small molecule and it can easily travel around the body in the blood and in our body cells. Glucose, and in order for it to be stored, must be converted into glycogen, which is a large molecule. The hormone insulin and glucagon, sorry, that's a typo, that should say glucagon, they regulate the amount of glucose in the bloodstream. Insulin is made by beta cells in the pancreas. Now, they are made in a specific area of the pancreas called the islets of Langerhans. The same location is where glucagon is found, but we'll talk about that in a second. Insulin encourages the uptake of excess glucose by body cells, removing glucose from the bloodstream and therefore lowering the blood glucose concentration. Glucagon, again, is found in the islets of Langerhans in the pancreas, but the type of cell is different. Glucagon is made by alpha cells. And what glucagon does is it stimulates the breakdown of glycogen into glucose. And what that does is it allows glucose to be released from body cells, such as the liver and the skeletal muscle, and therefore When it leaves that cell, it enters the bloodstream, thus raising the blood glucose concentrations. This cartoon is just a little summary. If you're more of a picture person, you could use this to help inform your notes. And it's just explaining the same thing. The pancreas has the islets of Langerhans, and within the islets of Langerhans, we have beta cells and alpha cells in green here. The blue beta cells release the hormone insulin, which encourages uptake of blood glucose, therefore decreasing blood glucose concentration, whereas the alpha cells release glucagon, and that encourages the breakdown of glycogen to glucose, which means that there is a higher level of sugar in the blood at the end. Okay, guys, I want you to pause the booklet, pause the video just now and open your booklet at page 18 and complete the questions on that page. Once you've done that, you can restart and we'll continue on. Hi guys, welcome back. Right, now that you've got your head around the difference between glucose, glycogen, glucagon and insulin, I'm going to throw more words at you, I'm afraid. We are going to be looking at something called glycogenesis. So I've broken that word up for you at the top, and you can see that glyco is short for glycogen, so that should be easy to remember. And the word Genesis, like the first book of the Bible, means to create. So we are literally creating glycogen. So when insulin is activated because there's a high glucose concentration in the bloodstream, insulin, its job is to stimulate glucose uptake by cells of glucose, and that extra glucose will be converted into glycogen. So what we're saying is new glycogen has been created, and that is called glycogenesis. So this word equation here, this entire process can be described as glycogenesis. Now we're going to be looking at the opposite scenario. So this is a slightly longer word, but we can break it up again. Glycogen, so that's just glycogen here, so that's how we store excess glucose molecules. And then we have the word lysis. Lysis simply means to split. So glycogenolysis is the splitting of glycogen. So again, early in the morning, if you haven't eaten for 6 to 8, maybe 10 hours or more, you will have a very low blood glucose concentration. You are able to function normally and be okay with that because the hormone glucagon stimulates the breakdown of glycogen into glucose. So this reaction, the glucagon reaction, is described as glycogenolysis. All right, so just to make sure that you are comfortable with everything, I'd like you to watch this short video. It's only a couple of minutes that summarizes glucose, what we've been talking about, blood glucose concentration and homeostasis. Once you've done that, please can you complete pages 19 and 20 of your booklet. Most of that is just reading, so make sure that you highlight any key words and that you understand the content. Hi guys, welcome back. In this feedback loop, simple one, we are looking at how all of these words come together. So if we start at the top here, insulin, just to remind you, is made by beta cells in the pancreas, specifically in the islets of Langerhans in the pancreas. And insulin is secreted in response to a high blood glucose concentration. So if we follow this red arrow down, insulin encourages glycogenesis, which is the formation of glycogen. So we are converting lots and lots of glucose molecules into one big glycogen molecule. And as a reminder, this happens in liver cells and also skeletal muscle cells. On the other side of that, we have glucagon down the bottom, remembering that is produced by the alpha cells in the islets of Langerhans in the pancreas, and that is produced in response to a low blood glucose concentration. So if there's not enough glucose, we have to break down glycogen in the liver and skeletal muscle again and convert it to glucose. The name of that process of glycogen breakdown is glycogenolysis. Here is just a very simple cartoon of a negative feedback loop. I'd like you to pause the video and have a look at this. Make sure that you are comfortable with what is going on. You should be able to write a couple of sentences to describe this. So pause the video and have a go at that, please. Okay. We are now going to be looking at pages 21 to 23 of your booklet, and we're going to be summarizing the role of the pancreas and the liver. So if we start by looking at the left-hand side, having a high blood glucose concentration, hopefully by now you should be associating that with the secretion of insulin from the beta cells. Now if we think about that, glucose enters cells. So when glucose enters cells, a number of things will start to happen. First of all, which we've talked about, glucose is converted to glycogen. So that's glycogenesis occurs in liver and skeletal muscle tissue. As a result of that, it seems obvious, but more body cells will take up more glucose, and that results in a reduction of glucose in the blood. But there's a couple of other things that we need to point out. Excess sugar can be converted to fat, and that encourages fat cells to store more fat, because that is energy that we are not using, so our body has to find another way of storing it. If you are someone with a lot of muscle, or you are using that muscle for some sort of physical activity, your cells will take that glucose and carry out aerobic respiration for protein synthesis. So this is how you can build more muscle tissue, because you're taking that energy from glucose, breaking it down to produce ATP, and therefore you can drive the process of making new proteins. All four of these things will have a common effect in reducing blood glucose concentration. On the other side of that, if you have a low blood glucose concentration, hopefully, again, you should be associating low blood glucose with alpha cells that are secreted from the islets of Langerhans in the pancreas. And the alpha cells will secrete glucagon. And the effect of glucagon is to convert glycogen back to glucose, which is glycogenolysis. And liver and skeletal muscles will release their glucose and thus increase the blood glucose concentration. Okay, guys, so we've learned quite a lot so far. I would like you to pause the video here and complete pages 21, 22, and 23 of your class booklet. Make sure that you are using the information here to help you work through that, and carefully check your answers. All right, here's a very quick summary of what we have learned in this lesson. Glycogenesis is the reaction that occurs when insulin stimulates glucose molecules to enter cells and to be converted into glycogen. Glycogenolysis is the reaction that occurs when glucagon stimulates the breakdown of glycogen to glucose, which then will leave the cell and enter the bloodstream. We know that glycogen is mostly stored in the liver and skeletal muscle cells, And insulin has other effects, such as promoting fat storage and increasing the rate of protein synthesis. Okay, guys, that's the end of this lesson. Once you have completed the pages in your booklet, please make sure that you do the quiz on My Ed Online, and I'll see you in the next one.